Thank you so much for joining us today, everybody, again for another episode of our Securing the Knowledge podcast. Today, we're discussing a bit of an interesting and, I suppose, in some cases, controversial topic of when AI can go wrong. I'm really excited to be joined today by Sapna Patel, who's a technology and cyber leader and board member. You spent the bulk of your career in a very competitive space, in the investment banking space, but has recently pivoted into a not-for-profit and education sector. Sapna, do you want to give the listeners or watchers at home or on their commutes a bit of an introduction to yourself if they don't know?
Yes, Grace. As you were saying, I've got a long career in technology in the investment banking sector. And, I started out as a developer or analyst programmer, as we were called back in the day, and then just moved up into management gradually. I've worked in enterprise architecture, infrastructure, project and program management. And then, after sort of nearly 20 years in investment banking tech, I pivoted to being a cybersecurity leader in the not-profit sector. And I'm also a trustee and board advisor to other organizations. The way I look at AI is from all those perspectives. So not just from a governance perspective. So I see the benefits of AI and how much it's grown recently and advanced very quickly, but also I look at it from a functionality perspective, a scalability perspective, a benefit to business, as well as all the governance perspectives. And the governance itself is quite a large topic, which I guess we'll go into today, won't we?
Yes, we certainly will. And it's nice to kind of know for everyone that we are going to discuss quite a broad selection of views and topics, related to this. But I suppose to start us off, when we kind of talk about AI going wrong or misbehaving, what are some of the most striking examples that you've seen of AI either acting in an unexpected way or unsafe way, shall I say, or just generally being naughty?
Yeah, it's so generally every day I see it's sort of naughty by everyone's seen as it produces results that's incorrect, what are called hallucinations, because it fills in facts itself and things don't ring true. We also know about prompt injection attacks and biases, well publicized stories, but the one of the most recent, I think, scary situations was last week, the Claude Code attack by a nation state that harvested credentials, exfiltrated data, probably more of around 30 organizations. That was quite serious. So Claude Code, great tool for developers to use. But when there is a vulnerability that can be exploited, it could be devastating. I mean, there are other examples of, I think it was about a year ago, someone mentioned it recently as well in an event I went to, that a user was talking to an AI chatbot of a car dealership, and they got a quote that was ridiculously cheap, and the organization had to honor it. So that's misuse. That's not misuse, actually. That was AI going wrong, as you said, naughty. And then, not so much AI going wrong, but something to be careful about. I don't know if you remember this, Grace, when ChatGPT search queries or queries rather, were shared with Google Exposure and Google searches. That just goes to show you've got to be careful what you put into AI and what you ask it and discuss with it. I was quite shocked by that. It was for a short period only, but that just goes to show.
I dread to think that some people had searched during that time or asked.
Oh, I know. I know. Probably, and I think it was for people who actually had a ChatGPT account. So mostly people have probably had personal, the free accounts. They could ask anything.
Yeah.
Discuss really personal issues and things. Wow.
I know. Very scary stuff.
It is.
I think there are so many examples, where it is being naughty, as you say, in terms of just not
Yeah.
behaving what you want in the way that you want. But
Yeah.
then I think there is the more kind of vital topics of when it can be actively misused. And a lot of people bring in this approach that they kind of suggest, well, we have compliance guardrails, we have human in the loop intervention, we have all of these different methods to try and protect ourselves. But I think in practice, potentially some of these are setting us up for a false sense of security in that people suggest human oversight will resolve all manner of these problems. But in actuality, we're seeing time and time again examples where that isn't enough. Do you think that human in the loop type of approach is enough? Do you think there's other guardrails or compliance things? And I know that we were having a chat before we hit the record button on some of these topics.
I know we missed some good stuff before you hit record. Just such a shame anyway. Well, so I think that is a false sense of security, because when you're talking about AI, you're really talking about decisions that are made, right? It's not automation. So when you've got decisions being made, it's in a black box. What human oversight can really be there? You can look at the results every so often, but are you looking at the results often enough? You can't really control the decisions anyway if it's a black box. So I think it is a false sense of security. It's worse when the AI interacts externally, because the decisions made are just go outside. They've left the building. You can't have human oversight over those all the time. And when I mean externally, I also mean any integrations or APIs externally. I don't mean just sort of chatbots and customer service things. The other thing is, when we talk about human oversight, we've got to really be clear what type of oversight and what level. Before we hit record, when we were talking about some good stuff, I just suggested to you something that I really is a peeve of mine, is AI just sprouting up in cloud products without us being informed. Now, with that kind of AI, who exactly is having the oversight? If it's your instance of a cloud product, is it the provider? It's certainly not you, as if you didn't even know about the AI. So, and if it is the provider, what level? It wouldn't be as much as you would oversight your own AI. So yeah, I do think it's a false sense of security. That's a very long answer to what you asked.
Well, it's a difficult question just to say yes or no. There's a lot of different context around it.
Yeah. Oh, you also asked about what should we be doing? Oh, I don't know. I think what I've said is long enough. Do you want me to go into?
If you have any poignant, things that I think people can action at home, I always love to make this kind of positioned in that sense that those that are listening might be able to pick up a tip or two and implement those as well from your experience.
So, I mean, with the first thing about human oversight is verifying AI responses. You want to check for mistakes. If there's any kind of organizational reliance on those responses, you definitely want to be checking more often. But the other thing is, for people watching at home, and bear in mind we've got a wider audience, don't provide it data it doesn't need. There'll be less to have oversight of if you don't provide it personal data, because once it's provided, you can't remove it. So it sort of breaks apart GDPR in a way, because what is right to deletion, what is right to correction, if you can't delete it or correct it from what the AI has been given, right? So segregate what the AI should be doing and just give it as little as possible. It could still be useful. Make it have simple decisions and prevent any external interaction. So that external interaction will also prevent any sort of reduce any chance of poisoning or bias coming in. You probably will still have some bias depending on how it was trained. And you could still have poisoning, right? Especially if a model's interacting with several agents. But you'd reduce the chance if you reduce the external interaction.
And I think that brings.
There's a lot more to say, but
it's
talk
hard
about
just to pick a
identity of AI and non-human identities and all that. But I'm
Yeah,
sure people get the ideas.
that's your number one to go home with. And I think that's a great point to kind of bring us on to, another question in relation to, I think a lot of people implement these models or automation into tools and see it almost as harmless. But obviously, as you mentioned, the more you feed it, the more it knows, the more it learns, the more it can be potentially used either against you or exfiltrated, or, God forbid there is a breach that has access to that data. When we talk about exposing sensitive data to those kinds of models or automation processes, why do you think that is so often missed when people do have, I suppose, this false sense of security again, that it might not happen?
Well, it could be for various reasons. It depends on the original decision makers and who was in the room. It could be because an end user thinks because it's available for use at an organization, it must be secure and therefore harmless. Therefore, I can go ahead and use it or whatever, use a model. It could be because that perspective wasn't considered, or the people who overviewed something didn't know the full context. I mean, or it could be that it's part of a growing agentic AI system where agents are communicating with other agents. The transfer of data, because you've got a little decision maker passing data to another little decision maker, you can't know for sure what's being transferred. It could depend on the permissioning one agent has of data that it shouldn't have by an oversight, that it passes on to another agent that isn't designed to have that information, but then has it. It could be any number of things, but if you've got a chain of agents, the chance of something being missed is higher because you've got, like I said, little decision makers talking to each other.
And I guess if we're thinking about, I suppose, an AI failure in one of those little decision makers or in the chain of kind of processes there, I like that description.
Don't quote me on the little decision makers thing. I don't want to be known for that.
But is there such a difference between a failure of an AI and an actual cyber incident, where you might have seen, an exfiltration or some kind of attack vector happen? Should we treat them the same in terms of urgency and discipline? Do we actually, benefit from, I suppose, differentiating between the two? Or do you think that actually over time, those two will kind of become closer together in the outcomes that we face?
I don't think, I think it really depends. So the first thing I'd question whether organizations are ready to handle AI incidents in the way they are cyber incidents or cyber breaches. But so we've talked about some of the things that could happen with AI and the difference. I think they are different because of the intent. So I tend to think of cyber incidents as having a root cause of malicious intent, whereas AI failures are a failure in the setup. The AI has run away with itself. Guardrail failures or some kind of governance failure potentially, although they could be malicious in the case of prompt injections, right? So that is the crossover prompt injection type of attacks, and that's quite a sort of an umbrella term now. There's several ways to do it. Prompt injection. So that bit is similar. As the way you treat them, I think they'd be different with a traditional cyber incident, not a new style cyber incident, is AI root cause. I think speed is important to limit the impact, contain it, and recover. With AI, you've got to understand the failing first, and then hopefully have a plan to recover, which could be quite complex. But to even know there's a failure, you've got to have visibility, and that's quite challenging, as we've said. So they're different. I think the key with preventing AI failures is definitely still planning at very early stages and red teaming. So you have to have your pen testing and red teaming plan for testing your AI. So you can start to look at some failures early on. So I don't know if I've answered your question, Grace, because I said there is a crossover, but they're different.
That is still an answer. I think,
Thank you.
A lot of them, I think a lot of these things, they do it's like a Venn diagram, right? There's parts that they share, but they are distinct in their own kind of ways of having to be treated, and also, as you say, the specific reason why they're happening. I think something that you did
Yes.
approach upon at the start was, are businesses actually prepared to treat incidents of that manner in the same thing? And if we were to take this as a broader question, say we did see a massive AI incident on the scale of a major cyber breach, the likes of which, we've seen quite a number in the past year or so, to some of our favorite brands that, we might almost see as bulletproof in some ways. Do you think that there is a possibility that there could be a breach of that nature? And if so, or even if not, do you think businesses or, us in general are actually prepared to handle that potential risk or mitigate it or even know how to start unpicking it there? Because
Do you mean, well, I guess by some of the big brand names, some of the ones that were attacked towards the end of last year, yeah, that was a shame, wasn't it? I feel bad for them. But so do you mean attacks like the Claude Code one, that is AI used to facilitate, or do you mean attacks on AI in organization via AI in organizations? Because if it's the former, AI used to orchestrate a cyber attack, I think some of our traditional ways of monitoring, spotting them, and containing them could still work, but we've got to, because of the scale of potential, we've got to be quicker at it, and we've got to be even earlier, and we've got to have even more visibility. If you actually mean attacks via or on our AI in our organizations, that's different. That's about, what we were saying before, making sure we know what we're doing, setting up the right structure. I see them as two different things.
So I guess if we're looking at potential ramifications of AI as well, and in implementing those into our everyday kind of working lives, do you see that as kind of a net benefit that we have? Or do you think that, in a security operations sense, they could make us more vulnerable in that aspect? And that could be based on either because it can be used to obviously, infiltrate systems and people, or because, as we mentioned earlier, there is such a wealth of data and potentially sensitive things that are going into it on a day-to-day basis.
That's a really great question, Grace. And I think potentially over-reliance on AI could make us more vulnerable if AI that's used in security operations, right, gives misdirections or makes mistakes, or as a result, due to low resourcing levels, there's an over-reliance on that AI, missing stuff as well as false positives sort of thing is what I mean. But also with AI outside of that use case situation, vulnerabilities are amplified with AI because they're discoverable much more easy. They're easier to take advantage of using AI. So yes, in also that sense, it's not over-reliance on AI, it's attackers using AI to a great degree. So that does make us vulnerable. But so security does need to step up. And I think the security community has been stepping up really well, actually, and has been keeping up with AI progress and changes really well. In fact, industry peers, I'm just so impressed by how everyone's on it, actually. But security resourcing's also been cut back, as we all know, which I think it will be regretted in future years. But that also plays into making us more vulnerable as organizations. Who's defending, who's watching, who even knows about this, the visibility I talked about, visible to whom, if there's nobody manning the deck. So yes, 3 ways in which it does make us more vulnerable.
And just to kind of wrap up our very brief, because I know we could get into so many different facets of this conversation, but just to scratch the surface today, if there was anything that you would hope that those listeners or watchers of this could take away with them on this subject, what would be your final thoughts on this?
On AI governance, just make sure you have a catalogue of where you are for maturity. I don't see that governance, and as I said, AI governance is quite a huge topic, very many aspects to it. I don't see it as affecting innovation. In effect, actually it will save innovation, because without any kind of AI governance or full governance, you will have an issue, whether it's correctness, abuse, accidental misuse, data leaks. You will have an issue with that governance. And to save your business operations, if you do governance right in the right way, that will be more innovative, and you'll be able to grow at pace with that in place. And we're talking about data governance markers that when at the source where the data is used, access levels of AI and all the agents, a log and record of the personal information that any AI would have access to, making sure you've got an observation capability on everything and a visibility as much as possible. And, the worst case, you have a recovering plan, on if something were to happen, what would you do in each case? And that would depend on what model you're using, whether it's bought AI or in-house AI. So you have a few plans. And of course, as everyone knows, a supply chain assessment of AI use. So you are, again, a long answer for you, Grace.
No, but full of really useful things. And I think that's what I've loved about this conversation, is that it's been thought driven, but also very actionable for those who are taking this on, and maybe wising up to a few risks that maybe they weren't aware of, or ones that might be keeping them up at night as well.
What keeps me up at night.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Sapna. I hope those that are at home have enjoyed this conversation. Again, thank you all for listening or watching the Securing the Knowledge podcast today, and I hope to see you all on our next episode.